Greg, welcome back to the podcast.
Great to be here.
Every now and then we have a conversation before the podcast.
Yeah, we were primed and ready to go today. So.
Oh, fun times. Fun times. Well, it's good to see you, my friend. And I did want to ask you something. This is totally unrelated. But have you seen this thing about a gorilla versus 100 men?
I have.
Who takes it? What's your response to that?
I'm one of those that would land in the camp of, I don't think the gorilla would win, but I don't think there'd be 100 people left over at the end either. So
I think that's fair. That's kind of where I landed. And it also depends on, like, who are these guys?
Yeah, I would like to draft them, personally.
I saw some guys talking, they're like, all right, I'm picking this guy and this guy. That's funny.
I mean, if you picked 100 random dudes from this part of Arkansas, we're taking him out.
Yeah, I think
pick 100 random dudes from Harvard, the gorilla probably going to carry the day, but it's just my opinion. So,
oh, that's great. Okay. That was unrelated. That was just all free. Okay. Good stuff. All right. Can we talk about technology?
Absolutely.
I've heard you say before, technology is neutral. So is it fair to ask? So it means be good and bad. What can I ask first? Just like, what do you love about technology? Because it is kind of cool. Yeah. Like, what do you love about technology?
Well, I'll say this: that quote, "Technology is neutral," is actually kind of a butcher. There's a guy, I think, like Marcus or Melvin Katzenberg, who actually coined that phrase. He was a really cool dude. He was an interrogator for Patton in World War II, but he had a degree from Harvard, of all places, I believe. That was back in the day.
It's different Harvard. Yeah.
And he actually created these like 6 laws of technology, and one was technology is neither good nor evil. It's a neutral thing, and I believe that. And what do I really love about technology? I believe innovation is something worth celebrating. And I think we all, when we see something new that in a very good way makes our lives easier or helps advance society or is a medical breakthrough, I do think at some point in our lifetime, there are going to continue to be major innovations made in terms of fighting certain cancers. And, who doesn't, I think, get excited about that? And so it's that innovation side of technology that I think really attracts me, that I really appreciate. And, I think also gives me maybe a little grace when you see technology gone wrong. It's rare that something is birthed. Maybe this is a general overstatement. It's too bad we don't have like questions popping up on our podcast. But, my gut says that the best innovators tend to be really positive people. They tend to be trying to do it for the greater good, so to speak. I'm not saying they have a biblical motivation, but I think people who are doing those sorts of things, they're trying to help people. And even it's a shame, like the nuclear bomb. I mean, nuclear fusion in and of itself, I think everyone understood when they were working on some of that technology from the beginning, the amount of power that could be generated to be used for good was extraordinary, And so there's something about innovation that I do believe we can get into the theology of like co-creation and, God's the creator, but I think he made us as little co-creators. Man's supposed to be a steward of this earth and this world, and I think we're supposed to make this place a better place. And one of the ways we do that is we innovate and we create, and technology is certainly, the generation we're living in, it doesn't matter what field you're in, probably, but even agriculture is very technologically driven now, and I think that's the beauty of it. That's what gets me excited about technology.
I like that, and I appreciate your perspectives, and I would agree with you. It feels like, and I've even heard when we've talked about the Heaven series, like when we get to heaven, the innovation could still be a part of it, like us coming up with new things, because that's part of how God made us in his image, and a huge part of who he is creator. So why would he remove like one of the key components? Anyway, fun discussion, fun thought.
Yeah. Hold on, let me run off that for a moment.
Yeah.
Because I always think one of the questions people give you about heaven and eternity is the size of the cosmos. There's a lot of things I'm skeptical about with modern research and technology and what people say, but the size of the cosmos I'm not really skeptical about. I believe this world is so much bigger than we can even fathom. And scientists would say that's true. There's universe beyond. why is it so big?
Yeah.
Well, I've got to believe there's a lot that we just have not even begun to tap. And so we're going to have eternity to explore this literally limitless universe. And so why would God then hand us the keys to all the innovation necessary to redeem that time? Why wouldn't he instead say, okay, I've made you in my image. I've dealt with sin. You're glorified. Put yourselves to work here, and let's figure out what we're going to do with all
love that.
Anyway,
and it does relate to our conversation, because in that context, like, it's all going to be good.
Yeah.
Right. And
there won't be corruption.
Yeah, that's right. So it's kind of really cool, because we can see the good now. Like, when you allude to those things, it's like, it's pretty cool. And of course, you think a world without sin, God, and that's super exciting. And I actually love that thought. I just think that's so fun. That just makes so much sense to God's character and who he is. And we'll find out. Whatever it is, I like how we won't be disappointed, right?
No, sir.
But I love that. No. But here on this side of eternity, it's a little different, because we know there's tension. We have sin, we have flesh, we have other motives for technology. And I have a confession, like, when new technology comes, I've noticed this about myself, like, I tend to resist it. Yeah. Like, I'll be like, that's so dumb. Like, when backup cameras came on cars, I was like, we got mirrors. People, like, why do we need a camera? And so I was resistant. And then fast forward a few years, and now I'm like, it's like a video game. You're like, I'm moving and I'm only staring at this screen. It's like, I'm totally relying on this technology. And that's so funny. I've noticed that about myself. It just takes me a little while, and then I can be good with it. I don't know why that is. Maybe it leads to the question where I wonder if part of me, like, I know Arlo has helped us. He's thought about this.
Yeah, we should say, I want to open the floor for Arlo if he has input to this conversation. Because he helped come up with this topic. So
he did, and I had to clarify, like, Arlo, how did you ask that again? And let me get this right. Is how much is too much? Did I get it right, Arlo?
Yeah.
How much is too much? And maybe that's part of my hesitation, because I feel some of that.
It can be abused.
And and I'm kind of like, let's not go down that. And so maybe part of my heart is like, so that's the question.
Yeah.
When is it?
Well,
how does it?
I think of like backup cameras. Simple place to take off on this, probably, and then I might go to the big picture for a moment after that. But backup cameras is a good example. I believe they were created as a safety mechanism, and once you've used them for a while, you realize, okay, there's even times when someone or something has darted behind my car, and the camera caught it, but my eye couldn't.
The mirrors wouldn't help.
The mirrors wouldn't help. But I think we know that. How much is too much is when you're no longer using your mirrors and you rely entirely upon the camera. Well, then you've turned off some of the vital parts of, I think, your own ability to drive well. You know what I mean?
Yep.
That's when it's too much. It's like, I'm now so dependent that I'm no longer an active, I taught my kids how to drive. I'm like, your job is not just to be a good driver. This is probably bad, but your job is to assume everybody else is a really poor driver. They're an idiot, and that's how you stay alive on the road, And if you're just dependent upon your camera, then you're missing some vital information that your brain can give you. I think that's when you reach that point of too much.
Okay.
And, I think through the big picture of technology, I think it's good that Arlo asked the question, because I think we could make a pretty good argument that certainly in the last 30, 40 years, but even over the centuries, the church has been really resistant to technology in large part. I think the church has been more skeptical of technology than the rest of society.
Yep.
And honestly, I would argue, I'm not sure why that is true. I mean, because again, if we're right, if Katzenberg was right and technology is neutral, then why would the church naturally assume the worst about all innovation? It kind of begs the question. And it's a little bit like, we could get into the music weeds, and we don't want to do that, but why were churches married to the organ? Why were churches resistant to go to not just piano, but keyboards?
Yeah.
I know that was a big, I'm kind of like, well, there were no organs in the Old Testament. The early church didn't use
that itself was an innovation.
At some point, that was an innovation.
Yeah.
So it's like, why will the church not admit, ooh, this thing is cheaper and it can mimic the sound and every church can afford? I mean, it's like... Yeah. That's what troubles me about the church's response to technology. And I would say it's the same like the movie industry, and that one maybe takes us a different tilt. But you know, the movie industry, or the ability to create something on film that's captivating, is a neutral. The problem was that no one could afford to do it initially. And so the reins and the money were being held by people who were probably opposed to a biblical worldview for a long time. But you know what? The reality is, with AI and even the technology we're using, like on this podcast, it's become a lot more affordable. But there's almost still like this resistance to that form of media by the church. I would argue that's one of the reasons why, Christian film has not created much quality. I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but you know what?
Yeah.
It's like, well, they make dirty movies, so we can't make good movies. I've never understood that, and I get the fact that there was a money gap, but that gap's being closed. And like with podcasts, I would argue all this technology is a neutral technology. I know people use it for really bad things, but why wouldn't the church jump in? And we didn't drop $100,000 on the technology it creates to make this podcast, and I'm kind of happy that we didn't take 30 years to get with the trend. But
let me ask this, because you mentioned the organ, and I didn't think about it from this angle, but I do want to get to AI because I'm curious what you about some of that. But I think in light of people resistant to taking on the new, technology can easily become an idol.
Yeah.
And is that kind of a test? Like when something new is introduced, if we're so resistant because of this older thing that we've learned to love and appreciate, and how dare someone else try to take this away from us? Is that a sign? Like in that way, it became too much. This thing, not that the innovations became too much, but the thing that we are relying on became too much to us. Is that fair? Is that something to watch?
I think that is getting into the fleshly side of this argument. We all know there are people by nature who like things the way they are, and there are people who by nature are innovators and creative, and they like to shake it up, and they always want to do something new. And I would argue neither one of those personalities are right or wrong. I think you need some of both. Our staff team's a good example. If we had all innovators, nobody would maintain, and it'd be bad, and if you have all maintainers, then you would never reach new people, you'd never do anything new. You need both. There's something fixed in all of us that we want it the way we want it, and we want to judge the other, and so that's, you got that group of people who won't turn the page and accept something new because they've begun to idolize the status quo, and that's the sin, I think.
So getting into AI, you're a pastor. You're our lead pastor. So you're preaching every Sunday. And, that I've seen now the tools are like the greatest. I've been seeing this ad. It's like I don't know. I was like, it's like some AI tool to help preachers. So what do you do with that?
Yeah. Well, I've got a lot of reservations with that, probably. And that's where how much is too much. I think when you rely on technology to do the job that's best done by an individual, I think you're moving into problems. Okay. So I'll say this. I know Holy Spirit's not helping AI do its job. The Holy Spirit will help you do your job, help me. So I want an individual under the leadership of God making spiritual decisions and teaching spiritual truth. I don't want AI driving that train. And I would even argue, since you asked about AI, I'm not convinced AI is as neutral a technology as some other things. AI is dependent upon input.
Someone's pulling Indy or in that. I learned he loved the puppet strings. Yeah, I thought that was a good observation. I think you're right.
Yeah, you need to be cautious. You need to be cautious when the technology comes laden with somebody's input or can be bent real easily. Again, I think somebody hands you an iPhone. Okay, well, I don't. Apple as a company may be liberal or this, that, or the other, but I think in general, there's certain elements of it. I know if you ask Google a question, let's be honest, Google's going to give you a liberal answer. Google's not a fair technology when it comes to, who should I vote for president? You're going to get a bent. Again, I'm not saying where you should land. I'm just simply saying there's a bent there. That means it's not neutral anymore. Yeah. But an iPhone as a piece of technology, it's what you do with it. So that's what I mean by neutral. And it's in the hands of the user. And
that's good.
There's lots of great things you can do with it, and there's lots of bad things.
That'd be an interesting test. Like ask it some hard questions, like is Jesus God? Is abortion, you could
I've seen where AI
got
can
some stuff
do a
right.
better job than like generally Google does.
That's cool.
Now, of course, Google has its own version of AI, I think.
And now they all got names, and I'm getting confused.
Yeah,
like
you
we
can't
got
keep
Grok
up.
and what do we
But it's
do?
all dependent.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason why they all have names is we want you to know who built this system and who inputted the data.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, is that the data sways even its decision making. And I think if you take that technology to its ultimate end, there's some power being turned over to some of these AI systems that I'm not convinced we're ready to let computers have. I'm not trying to be an alarmist. I have no problem with, in general, even like Siri and Google and all those things are now being powered by AI, and you're getting better information, more accurate information quicker. Like you can ask it, how is the ERA of a major league pitcher determined? It's going to give you a better answer than it would have 10 years ago. Well, that's you might say neutral.
Yeah.
But once you ask it a question that is dependent upon a perspective,
And it
like
changes.
why, even if you ask, why did the Roman Empire collapse? Well, you're going to get a certain strand of history,
That's good. I do like, is it really the comparison where we started with mirrors? I like how you said, hey, the minute that I can't do both, like this should assist me, but I shouldn't be totally reliant upon it. I should still be connected to everything.
Yeah.
It feels a little like that, like with all things, like the minute that, like, so if you want to utilize it to help, like it's not wrong to use, but it certainly like can't be your drive. Like it can't be your very thing that you're relying on entirely. Like it has to be. So I like that. That's good.
Well, and I think of that like in context of, we just went through Mother's Day not that long ago. Not went through, but we celebrated Mother's Day.
Sure.
And I remember saying something during my message about, I think we're closer as a society to a place where, gender roles you got to be careful. I don't want to offend anybody, but we're closer as a society where, a lady can have everything, so to speak. You can be married, you can have children, you can have a vocation, you can get an advanced degree and work an advanced job, and you can probably balance all those balls because, let's be honest, you have a washer and you have a dryer and you have a dishwasher and you have a stove and a microwave. Those kind of advances, technology has done that, and those things are neutral. And I would say, certainly someone who is passionate and has a lot of skill for, say, a real world kind of job, I've not discouraged any, say, professional lady from working professionally and raising, her kids as well in partnership with her husband. I think that's a great thing.
Yeah.
Because you can do it now. 100 years ago, someone had to be home cooking and cleaning. I mean, we can argue about matriarchal society all day long, but somebody had to do that. And in general, the jobs that were available, a man could make more money than a woman could, so it made sense. My point is going to be this. This is where it becomes biblical. The tools are there. The tools are neutral. And I think the doors are wide open to how we, say, structure our homes, our marriages, mom, dad, kids, all those things, and working professionally. Here's your problem. If God designed women with an innate desire to be a mother, and her heartstrings are naturally knit toward her kids in certain ways, if you start to allow technology to then cause you to burn the midnight oil on a profession and your family is being neglected, there's going to be tension. There's going to be heartburn. There's going to be a spiritual battle, I think, occurring. It doesn't mean you can't work. It doesn't mean the technology is bad, but it means you're beginning to allow these maybe creature comforts to give you an excuse to work more than you emotionally want to.
That's good.
I hope I'm expressing myself right.
Well, I hear you say.
I think that's the battle.
When you're answering the question, like in that scenario, it became too much.
Yeah.
So it's not even what's available, it's how you're utilizing it, or to the degree that you're utilizing it.
Yeah.
Because if it's removing you from the very things that we know God wants us to engage in and encounter and interact with, right now we're the dude driving the video game. It's like No, that's interesting. I like that perspective, and it really is challenging to think about that because technology is advancing and it's cool. It makes life very convenient. I mean, there's some cool things, and it makes it safe. Like, so the backup camera, I'm with you. Like, there's things it can see things we can't with our mirrors. As cool as that is, that's we're not gonna. So that's great.
And I would flip that. That was maybe more of a women, let's talk about a man situation.
Yeah.
Very, very similar abuse, just meaning, okay, so maybe your wife wants to stay home and is taking care of the kids, and that's the choice you made. Well, you're still abusing, say, technology if then when you go on family vacation, you don't put that thing on Do Not Disturb, and you're constantly taking business calls.
Yep.
You're constantly returning texts. When you're married to that technology and you're not putting on the dad hat, well, again, you've begun to abuse something, neutral technology.
It's become too much.
So just so people will say he picked on men and women, I want to make sure I've done that.
And since we're picking on both, like another example is, it's become too much. Speaking of phones, we can communicate all day long through this thing in our hand, and yet real life interaction is becoming harder and harder for people to do. So that's an interesting dynamic, is you have this unlimited access to people in their lives, and yet the stats are people are more lonely than ever. It's like, well, wait a second, maybe it's that the answer to Arlo's question is it has become too much for too many people, because the fact that if we're that connected, so to speak, like and we see what's going on and whose dog passed away and and all this stuff, who graduated, all the things there, all the life moments, we're there, and yet we're lonely. We don't know how to communicate. Like, so wait a second. It's become too much. And so I think I do appreciate, I think you've given a good balance to this conversation, which is, hey, let's utilize the technology. Let's embrace the good things and the cool innovation that's fun to celebrate. Like, that's neat. And that gives God glory, because we're designed to do those things. Like, we shouldn't be sitting around not making new things. Yeah. But there has to be some balance to it, and there's still real life, there's still interaction, there's still my responsibilities that I can't just say, all right, AI, you got this. AI can't raise kids for you. You know what I'm saying? It's like, or we could go down the list, right? AI can come up with some good examples of, funny stories about kids, but it's not, I'm sure it can do some fun, but it can't do that for you. So I think that's a good balance. I like that. That's helpful. That's helpful as we think about this and trying to navigate, how much is can it become too much? How do we know? Maybe that's the last question we got to land on. How do we know?
Ooh, yeah.
Because that's we want to embrace it, like we want to celebrate it. Oh, we lost Arlo, didn't we?
Yeah, I'm afraid he can't.
Yeah, he can't switch it. I don't know who it's on right now. We're good.
Well, we're at I feel like you kind of wrapped that.
Keep going.
How do you leave it?
It's you now. It was on the empty seat. You're good.
Yeah, because I think you can split that right where we were trying to figure out the camera situation.
Yeah, probably.
You're good.
We're
good.
Splice that though.
We'll splice that.
I'll just leave. It wasn't long enough. We're good.
Okay.
Yeah. How much is too much, huh? Yeah. No, you just rephrased your question though. Where'd you?
I don't know.
Yeah.
How do we know? Because it's something that we celebrate. Like, hey, this is it is cool. It's fun, but also like, I don't want it to become too much. Something I'm relying on. And I'm not. So how do I recognize if I've gotten off track? One of two ways. Either I refuse to accept new technology. There's something can be wrong with that. That's not something's wrong with my heart. If I'm always like, no, that's dumb. That's not. There's something kind of maybe there's some idolization of some older stuff. But also too much of an embrace of the new can be an error. So like, how do we know as we move forward, and as this is only increasing, and certainly when you think of AI, because it's becoming into every single thing, like every new app and every new or like program, like whether it was like Photoshop, things like this. I mean, it's in everything now. New devices that are coming out. I mean, it's all there. How do we kind of stay on guard against knowing whether we've
crossed the line?
Too much? Yes.
Yeah. And I think of maybe a very spiritual answer, and then I think of a very human answer, and maybe you meld them. But I think one, we've all been in situations where maybe it's a video game or this, that, or the other, where we just feel, Spirit convicting us that you got to turn this off, or maybe it's watching something. It's like where this is headed. You need to turn it off now. I'll give you a very human example for me. I mean, not to make it. I don't want to get to the human yet. I'll get there, but even spiritually speaking, like Baltimore Orioles are really bad this year. Okay, well, from a technology standpoint, I have the ability to know more about the Baltimore Orioles baseball team today than I have almost at any point in my lifetime. I grew up an Orioles fan, we don't have to tell that story, but there was a time where they might play 8 times a year on national television, and I could watch. And then I could get a newspaper. Newspapers existed for a long time. There was no internet when I first became a fan, so I had to go physically find a newspaper and see a box score. Well, now I have interacted with sportscasters who are at every game, who are given. You can tweet them. You can have a conversation if you want. I mean, all this information. Well, I'm convicted continually, and I believe it's the Spirit that when Baltimore's doing good, I'm in a better mood. When Baltimore's doing bad, I'm in a worse. It's kind of like, well, that's when you know it's too much. When you literally feel the Spirit of God, if you're a believer convicting you, you're in bondage to this a little bit.
That's good.
But then I would even make that even human, like. Growing up, we had one child in particular who really loved the video games. And yet we could watch, there was a bridge that would get crossed where emotionally they responded differently. You knew. And that's when you're like, okay, it's got to be too much, because now you're not the same kid. There's something going on in that brain. Like, you need to turn this off because you're short-tempered. And it's just, again, and every child's probably a little bit different. But as parents, I think it's your job to recognize that and know when too much. Now, they're not going to like it, because when it's too much, and then you step in and say, it's going to be battle royal, but that's when you know it's too much, when there's that simple human personality change.
Good.
And I would argue that with every person listening to this. If you're an adult particularly, when it's too much, because it's starting to change your mood.
That's good.
Now, again, I made it spiritual. I feel like God's convicting me that it's changing my mood. But I know when something I'm watching is changing my mood, or Yeah,
it's almost like
just be real.
I appreciate that God's done that. Like, He's made it to where if we pay attention to that reality, like the mood, that means something. Just pay attention to that.
And that's where,
good.
like, you go back to one of the things we're talking about, organ, electric, keyboard. If you close your eyes, you don't know which one's which nowadays, so what are we arguing about?
Yeah.
We're arguing about the physical manifestation of what this instrument looks like. We're not arguing about whether we can worship,
I'm just glad
that's a false argument.
How about some kazoo celebration? That was pretty
we had
awesome.
Kazoos,
We had kazoos, man. I saw Robert playing. Shout out to Robert, having fun over there playing that kazoo. That's good. Well, thank you, my friend. Enjoyed the conversation. Until next time.
Yes, sir.
God bless.